A couple of months ago, a friend from the Midwest who now lives in California put his circle of virtual friends all a Twitter after he posted a picture as proof that he was sitting in a breakfast diner and Samuel L. Jackson took the table right next to him. I often hear about sightings in Door County of former Packers coach Mike McCarthy, and I will have to admit that I was a little excited when I ran into travel guide writer Rick Steves on the train station platform in Florence, Italy. I even talked to him and said, "Hey, I'm a fellow ELCA Lutheran." If it isn't front-page news, we at least want our friends to know when we catch a glimpse of someone famous. Celebrities tend to be a pretty big deal for us generally. As much as we might take delight in coming close to a particular celebrity, it's an indication of more generally our high regard for people who are famous. So many people crave the bright lights of recognition. So many people trying to find their way to the center stage to get noticed. These days, anyone can do it, right? Anyone can make a video of themselves, upload it to YouTube, post a link to their Facebook page, and ask their friends to have a look, and then ask their friends' friends to have a look. And then comes the daily check to see how many people have liked your video. And if you've done your work, and with any luck, your video will go viral and you'll be famous for a few minutes. In 1968, Andy Warhol predicted in the future everyone would be famous for 15 minutes. Maybe more like 45 seconds. And at least everyone gives it a try. Pursuing glory and public fascination with those who obtain it is hardly anything new. For centuries, people have been showing up in public squares for a glimpse of royalty. In ancient Rome, when the Caesars came through town, they attracted enormous crowds. On the day that we call Palm Sunday, crowds thronged to Jerusalem to see Jesus, this famous itinerant preacher from Galilee. In a passage that comes before today's gospel reading, the religious leaders observed, "Look, see how everyone is coming to him." Immediately after that word, indicating that the leaders felt threatened by Jesus, some Greeks came asking the disciples if they could see Jesus. Could it be that they too were seeking a glimpse perhaps of this famous preacher and maybe even trying to get an autograph from this one that the world had gone after? But Jesus will have none of it. All the way through John's gospel, Jesus tries to transform this notion of glory. Again, a few chapters before the reading that we read this morning, Jesus has this to say: "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit." If it dies, it bears much fruit. Now, that's not the kind of glory the world has in mind. It's not the glory of YouTube, and it's not the glory of amassing hundreds of Facebook friends or making it big on American Idol. For Jesus, his greatest glory will be in giving his life for the world. It's not just that the world has a hard time grasping this notion of glory. Even his disciples want nothing to do with where Jesus says he's going and what Jesus says he's doing. In the scene that leads up to this lesson, a scene familiar to those of you who have attended our Maundy Thursday services, Jesus wants to wash Peter's feet. And of course, Peter objects. "You will never wash my feet," Peter says. Peter cannot grasp the notion that in receiving from Jesus, he is honoring Jesus, and that God is glorified through humble and sacrificial action. I'm trying to picture in my mind that first community to hear these words of John, maybe 60 or 70 years after Jesus was gone from the scene. And I'm recalling how they were a very small community, a peripheral community, virtually unknown, unrecognized, just trying to get along in the global economic and military power of the Roman Empire. For those early Christians, signs of Roman power were everywhere. From the Roman soldiers to the images of the Caesar on their coins, to the opulent splendor of the governments, the corruption of the proconsuls and other government officials who lived off the public dole. How could the church begin to understand why Jesus would say at the moment of his suffering and death, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him"? And for that matter, how are we to understand it? How, in our star-struck, celebrity-infatuated culture, are we to grasp that the whole notion of glory and recognition has been transformed through Jesus' death and resurrection? And how are we to grasp that we have been transformed through Jesus' death and resurrection, and therefore we walk a completely different path through life? Jesus doesn't try to argue or coerce either his first disciples or us into this new notion of glory and this new way of living. He comes to us in baptism. He offers us the forgiveness of our sins and a new way of being that no longer has the self at center, and then he gives us this very simple instruction: love one another. 3 words. Love one another. The newness of this commandment is not that nobody's ever heard it before. What's new is the source of this love. The crucified and risen one himself promises his presence in our lives, and he promises the transforming power of his love to animate us. With Christ in us, we no longer simply use words to describe to people what the cross and empty tomb mean. We love one another as the way to embody the Easter message, so that we, the children of Jesus, love one another as a way to demonstrate to the world God's love for them, and to demonstrate to the world that death no longer holds sway. I don't like, frankly, the way the NRSV translates one of those sentences in this lesson. There's a construction in the Greek language that makes much more concrete the connection between Jesus' love for us, demonstrated in his death and resurrection, and our love for others. I would rather that it be translated like this: I have loved you so that you may love one another. Do you hear the difference? I have loved you so that you may love one another. The gracious and generous action of Jesus, the action that we continue to celebrate through this Easter season, makes our love possible. I have loved you so that you may love one another. And we live this love not because we want any recognition for it, or because we know someone might be watching. We do it simply because that's the way the followers of Jesus live. We do it on Sunday, and then we do it on Monday. We do it in the morning, in the afternoon, and the evening. We do it at home and at work, with those we know and with those we don't. And it may be that the love we live will never be traced back to us, but we do it anyway because that's what followers of Jesus do. In her book, Out of Africa, Isaac Dinesen tells the story of a boy named Kitao. Kitao appeared at the author's door one day to ask for a job as a domestic servant. She hired him and was very pleased with his work, but was surprised when 3 months later he asked for a letter of recommendation to Sheikh Ali bin Salim, a Muslim who lived in a nearby town. Now, Dinesen offered to raise Kitao's pay in order to keep him, but she discovered that money was not the issue. Kitao had decided that as he approached adulthood, he was going to become either a Christian or a Muslim. And he had come to work for Dinesen so he could see up close how Christians live. Then he was going to go and work for Sheikh Ali to see how Muslims lived. And then he would decide. Dinesen writes that she wished Kitao had told her that before he came to live with her. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another.